In the early 16th century, the most powerful institution on earth was teetering on the brink of total collapse. For 1,000 years, the Catholic Church had been the unquestioned spiritual and political authority of Europe. But now it was bleeding out. A German monk named Martin Luther had exposed a deep rot of corruption, and his ideas, supercharged by the new technology of the printing press, were spreading like wildfire. From German villages to English courts, entire nations were breaking away. The Church's immense wealth was being seized, its authority was openly mocked, and its very existence was threatened. For one breathtaking moment, it looked like the old world was about to be swept away forever. But it wasn't. With its back against the wall, facing complete annihilation, the Catholic Church didn't just survive, it fought back. It launched one of the most dramatic, sweeping, and influential comebacks in human history. This is the story of how a wounded giant roared back to life, using war councils, new armies of faith, and an explosion of breathtaking art to reclaim its glory and reshape the modern world. How did the Catholic Church, on the edge of ruin, pull off one of the greatest turnarounds in history?
To understand the comeback, you first have to understand just how bad things had gotten. By the 1500s, the Catholic Church was in serious trouble. For centuries, it was the glue holding Europe together, but that glue was coming undone. The issues came from two directions: corruption from within and rebellion from without. Inside the church, the rot was deep. Top jobs were often bought and sold, not given to the most devout. Bishops lived like princes, playing power politics, while many local priests were uneducated, sometimes barely able to read. The most infamous practice was the sale of indulgences. The church taught an indulgence could shorten a soul's time in purgatory, but in the hands of cynical salesmen, it had become a grotesque fundraising scheme, perfectly captured by the jingle, "As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs." This was the world that Martin Luther, a brilliant and deeply devout theology professor, could no longer stand. In 1517, he published his 95 Theses, a list of explosive arguments against indulgences and other church practices. While the story of him dramatically nailing them to a church door is debated by historians, their impact is not. He argued that salvation came through faith alone, not by buying forgiveness, and that the Bible, not the Pope, was the ultimate Christian authority. Thanks to the printing press, his ideas went viral. What started as a scholarly debate erupted into a full-blown revolution. Across Europe, people were electrified by this call for a purer faith. Princes, eager to get their hands on church land and power, jumped on board. Within just a few decades, Protestantism had taken over huge parts of the Holy Roman Empire, Scandinavia, England, Scotland, and was growing in France and the Netherlands. The solid foundation of Western Christendom had shattered. The house was on fire, and for a while it seemed like Rome was powerless to put it out. The initial response was slow and confused, but as the flames rose, a defiant new spirit began to stir. The age of playing defense was over. It was time to counterattack.
Every great comeback needs a game plan. For the Catholic Church, that plan was hammered out in a small city in northern Italy called Trent. For nearly 2 decades, between 1545 and 1563, the leaders of the church gathered for what was basically a war council. The Council of Trent was the single most important event of the Counter-Reformation, a powerhouse of reform that would set the course for Catholicism for the next 400 years. The council had 2 massive jobs. First, draw an unmistakable line in the sand against Protestantism, and second, clean its own house. On the first front, there was zero compromise. The council acted like a doctrinal hammer, striking down every key Protestant idea. Protestants say salvation is by faith alone? The council declared that heresy, stating salvation comes from faith and good works. Protestants say there are only 2 sacraments? The council fired back, reaffirming all 7 sacred sacraments.
Protestants claim the bread and wine of communion are just symbols. The council doubled down on transubstantiation, the belief that the bread and wine literally become the body and blood of Christ. They rejected the idea that anyone could interpret the Bible for themselves, stating only the church had that authority. They reaffirmed the importance of saints, relics, and the existence of purgatory. With every decree, the theological gap between Catholicism and Protestantism grew from a crack into an unbridgeable chasm. They issued over 100 official curses, anathemas, on anyone who held these Protestant ideas. But this wasn't just about attacking the enemy, it was about healing the body. Pope Paul III, who called the council, knew they had to fix the legitimate problems that fueled the Reformation. So the council launched a massive cleanup. The corrupt sale of indulgences was banned. The practice of bishops living in luxury in Rome instead of their home dioceses was ended. And most critically, the council ordered that seminaries be built in every diocese to make sure future priests were educated, disciplined, and morally fit to lead. No more would parishes be led by men who couldn't even understand the Mass they were celebrating. When the Council of Trent finally closed, the Catholic Church was transformed. It was no longer a sprawling, disorganized medieval entity. It was now a disciplined, centralized, and ideologically unified fortress, with clear rules and an unshakable belief in its mission. The battle lines were drawn. But how would the Church enforce this new vision? The answer came in the form of a new spiritual army. With its doctrines reforged at Trent, the Church needed boots on the ground. It needed a new kind of soldier, one who fought not with a sword, but with intellect, faith, and absolute loyalty. It found that army in the Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits. The Jesuits were the special forces of the Counter-Reformation, and their founder was one of the most incredible figures of the age, Ignatius of Loyola. Ignatius wasn't a scholar or a lifelong priest. He was a Spanish nobleman, a swaggering soldier with his head full of dreams of military glory. That life ended in 1521 at the siege of Pamplona, when a French cannonball shattered his leg. His military career was over. During a long, agonizing recovery, with nothing to read but a book on the life of Christ and another on the lives of the saints, he had a profound spiritual awakening. The thirst for earthly glory was replaced by a burning desire to serve a higher king, Jesus Christ. He hung up his sword and devoted himself to a new kind of warfare, a spiritual one. After years of study, Ignatius gathered a small band of brilliant, like-minded friends. In 1540, Pope Paul III gave his official approval to their new order, the Society of Jesus. Their structure was unlike any other. Being a former soldier, Ignatius organized them with military discipline. Jesuits took the usual vows of poverty and chastity, but they added a special fourth vow, absolute obedience to the Pope. They would go anywhere and do anything he commanded, no questions asked. Their strategy for winning back Europe was a masterclass in influence. It had three main fronts. First, education. The Jesuits knew that to win the future, you had to mold the minds of the next generation. They built the most elite schools and universities in Europe, offering a world-class education. By educating the sons of kings, nobles, and merchants, they ensured Europe's future leaders would be devout, brilliant Catholics. Second, political influence. Jesuit priests became the trusted confessors and advisors to monarchs across the continent. From the halls of power in Vienna, Madrid, and Paris, they guided policy and made sure Catholic rulers stayed true to the cause. And third, global missions. The Jesuits launched the most ambitious missionary effort the world had ever seen. While Protestantism mostly stayed in Europe, Jesuit missionaries took the Catholic faith across the globe. They went to India, Brazil, the Congo, and Ethiopia. They were some of the first Europeans to enter nations like Japan and China, not as conquerors, but as men of science and learning, winning converts far beyond Europe's borders. Within a century, the Society of Jesus was a global force.
They were brilliant, strategic, and utterly devoted. The architects of the Catholic comeback, rebuilding the Church's power and halting the Protestant advance through intellect, influence, and sheer force of will. All right, quick pause. If you're enjoying this story of how a wounded giant roared back to life, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. It's a huge help and lets us bring more of these incredible historical sagas to you. Now back to how the Church used its most beautiful weapon.
The Church's response wasn't just about theology and strategy. It was also artistic. The Counter-Reformation unleashed an explosion of creativity that aimed not for the mind, but for the heart and soul. It was a new style of art, music, and architecture designed to overwhelm the senses and inspire pure awe, the Baroque. The Protestant Reformation had championed simplicity and austerity. Protestant churches were often stripped bare of images, their services centered on the spoken word. They saw fancy art as a distraction or even idolatry. The Council of Trent saw an opportunity here. They declared that art wasn't just okay, it was essential for teaching the faith and inspiring devotion, especially among the illiterate masses. The Church weaponized beauty. It became the #1 patron of a new artistic style that was everything Protestantism wasn't: dramatic, emotional, energetic, and magnificent. Step into a Baroque church and you're not just entering a building, you're stepping into a piece of theater. Architecture itself became a tool for conversion. Facades curve and ripple with energy. Inside, golden sunbursts explode from ceilings, and massive twisting columns draw your eyes up toward heaven. Illusionistic ceiling frescoes literally seem to open up the roof, revealing saints and angels swirling in a celestial sky. Sculpture was no longer calm and posed. It was frozen in a moment of intense, passionate action. Look at Gian Lorenzo Bernini's Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. This isn't just a statue, it's a soul caught in a divine vision, her face a mix of pain and spiritual rapture as an angel pierces her heart with a golden arrow. It is pure, raw emotion carved in marble, designed to make you feel the passion of faith. Painting took on the same dramatic flair. Artists like Caravaggio used a technique called chiaroscuro, an intense contrast between light and shadow, to create a gritty, in-your-face realism. His saints weren't idealized figures in the clouds, they were ordinary, suffering people, their holy moments made shockingly real. Other artists like Peter Paul Rubens filled enormous canvases with dynamic, swirling figures, creating altarpieces that were a riot of color and energy. This was propaganda in its most beautiful and powerful form. It made the Catholic faith feel tangible, miraculous, and alive. While Protestantism offered a faith of the intellect, the Baroque Counter-Reformation offered a faith of the senses. It reminded people that the Church was not just an institution of rules, but the home of mystery, beauty, and the divine. Doctrinal fortresses, spiritual armies, and awe-inspiring art were powerful tools. But the ultimate battle for Europe's soul wasn't decided in council chambers or art studios. It was decided on the battlefield. The Counter-Reformation didn't just inspire a renewal of faith, it fueled over a century of brutal, bloody conflict known as the Wars of Religion. This was the hard edge of the comeback. As the revitalized Catholic Church tried to reclaim lost territory and as Protestant states fought to defend their new faiths, Europe descended into a series of devastating wars where religion and politics became a murderous mix. In France, the conflict between the Catholic majority and the Protestant Huguenots raged for decades. It was marked by horrifying savagery on both sides, culminating in one of the most infamous atrocities of the era, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre in 1572. On that day, Catholic mobs, with a nod from the royal court, hunted down and slaughtered thousands of Protestants in Paris. The violence spread, leaving tens of thousands dead and poisoning French society for generations. In the Low Countries, what are now Belgium and the Netherlands, a revolt against Spanish Catholic rule turned into an 80-year war for independence. The fiercely Protestant North fought to break free, while Spain fought ruthlessly to crush the rebellion and lock down Catholicism, especially in the South. But all these conflicts were just the prelude to the apocalyptic finale, the 30 Years' War. Lasting from 1618 to 1648, it was one of the longest and most destructive wars in European history. It started as a religious fight in the Holy Roman Empire, but quickly spiraled into a continent-wide political death match, pulling in Sweden, Denmark, France, and Spain. The war annihilated parts of Germany. Armies crisscrossed the land, plundering cities, burning villages, and slaughtering civilians. The destruction was almost unimaginable. In the sack of one city, Magdeburg, some 20,000 people were killed. Entire regions were depopulated by battle, famine, and disease. Historical estimates on the total death toll vary widely, but it's believed that between 4 and 8 million people may have perished. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 finally ended the major religious wars. It wasn't a total Catholic victory, but it cemented a new reality. The treaty essentially froze the religious map of Europe. It recognized Protestantism where it had taken root, but it also confirmed that the Catholic comeback had worked. The Protestant tide had been stopped. Spain, Italy, France, Poland, and southern Germany had been secured for the Catholic Church, often through brutal force. The world had been violently remade. So, after all that blood, art, and faith, what was the final score? The Counter-Reformation didn't achieve its biggest dream. It didn't wipe Protestantism off the map. But in almost every other way, it was a stunning success. The institution that was on the verge of vanishing didn't just survive, it rebuilt itself into a leaner, more disciplined, and more powerful global force. Internally, the church was unrecognizable. The reforms from the Council of Trent cleaned up much of the corruption that had plagued it. The new seminaries produced a smarter, more effective clergy. The Pope's authority was centralized and strengthened, creating the top-down structure that defines the Catholic Church to this day. Geopolitically, the Counter-Reformation stopped the Protestant advance cold. It solidified Catholicism in southern and eastern Europe, reconquered places like Poland, and ensured France remained a Catholic nation. The religious map of Europe that emerged from these wars is, to a large extent, the one we still see today. But maybe its most profound legacy was global. While Protestantism remained a mostly European affair, the Counter-Reformation launched Catholicism onto the world stage. Driven by the missionary fire of the Jesuits and others, the Church planted its flag in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. For better or worse, this effort would indelibly shape the cultural and religious lives of billions. Today, there are over 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide, a direct result of the global expansion that began in this era. The story of the Counter-Reformation is more than just religious history. It's a story about power, survival, and the incredible ability of an ancient institution to reinvent itself when facing an existential threat. Confronted with a rebellion that shattered its world, the Catholic Church responded with a brilliant and ruthless mix of theological reform, missionary zeal, artistic propaganda, and raw military force. It fought its way back from the brink, and in doing so, it didn't just save itself, it redefined its identity and forever changed the course of world history. This incredible story of survival leaves us with a fascinating question. Was this movement really a counter-reformation, a pure reaction to the crisis Luther created? Or was it a Catholic reformation, an internal reform that was bound to happen anyway? Does real, lasting change come from an outside threat or from an internal drive to be better? The epic comeback of the Catholic Church suggests the answer is a lot more complicated than we might think.